The restaurant went silent when four little girls in matching red dresses marched up to the most feared man in the city. "Our mommy's sorry she's late," the tallest one said, and for the first time in his life, the Mafia boss forgot how to breathe. But when their mother finally walked in, he realized this was no coincidence. Who sends four kids to find a man like him? The rain came down in a soft drizzle over Il Valido, the kind of restaurant where even silence felt expensive. At a corner table, James Kaplan sat alone, his black suit pressed to perfection, his watch glinting beneath the candlelight. He checked it again, 21 minutes past the arranged time. For a man who ruled an empire where lateness could cost a life, this was bordering on intolerable. The blind date had been Marco's idea. "You need something normal," his consigliera had said. "Someone who doesn't flinch when you walk into a room." Normal? James almost laughed. There was nothing normal about his life. He was just about to rise, another wasted evening, when he heard it. "Excuse me, mister." For small voices spoke at once. James looked up and froze. Standing beside his table were four identical little girls, no more than 3 or 4 years old, each in a red dress with matching ribbons in their hair. They stared at him solemnly, like a tiny jury. "Are you Mr. James?" one asked, the tallest, her tones serious enough to belong in a courtroom. "I am," he said slowly, confusion threading through his usual calm. The smallest one, clutching a worn stuffed bunny, piped up, "Our mommy said she's sorry she's late. She's parking the car." The other three nodded in perfect synchronization. "She said to tell you not to leave." For a long second, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Staff froze mid-step. Patrons whispered. No one spoke to James Kaplan that way. But these four did. James felt something unfamiliar pull at the corner of his mouth, a smile. "Your mommy sent all four of you to find me?" he asked. Ava, he didn't know her name yet, but she was clearly the leader, nodded. "She showed us your picture on her phone. She said you'd be sitting by the candles. And here you are." James leaned back, studying them like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "And what's your mommy's name?" "Mama says her name's Helen." "Helen Deadman," another replied proudly. The name hit his memory like a distant echo, but before he could respond, the restaurant door opened. A woman rushed in, coat half-buttoned, rain in her hair, breathless and beautiful. She froze when she saw them at his table. "Oh my God," she murmured. "I told you to wait by the door." The girls beamed. "We found him, Mommy." Helen looked mortified, clutching her purse as she approached. "Mr. Kaplan, I'm so sorry. Parking was chaos, and she gestured helplessly at her daughters. "They took initiative." James stood, towering but unexpectedly gentle. "They're efficient," he said, lips curving faintly. "Found me before dessert." Helen flushed, half apologetic, half laughing. "I should have told your associate I have children. I just wanted one evening where I wasn't judged for it." Her words hung between them. Raw, vulnerable, honest. James met her eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the man people feared. "They're not a problem," he said quietly. "They're the best entrance anyone's ever made." Helen blinked, surprised. The girls giggled. And as the waiter brought another candle to the table, James realized the night wasn't a failure at all. It was the beginning of something that might undo him completely. That night, as the rain tapped against Il Valido's windows, James Kaplan, the man whose empire thrived on silence and control, found himself surrounded by laughter so pure it felt foreign. For years, he ruled the city with silence and fear. He'd built walls so high even loyalty couldn't climb them. But on the night his blind date failed to show, one flustered woman and 4 fearless little girls had walked right through his defenses as if they never existed, and everything he knew about control shattered. He didn't know it yet, but his life, and his definition of power, had just changed forever. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comment section where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next one. Now, let's get into the story. The laughter still lingered when the waiter brought fresh glasses of water to the table. The tension that had once filled Il Volito, that hush of reverence and fear that always accompanied James Kaplan, had softened into something almost normal. Almost. Helen Deadman sat across from him now, her cheeks still flushed from embarrassment, her rain-damp hair tucked loosely behind one ear. She had the kind of beauty that wasn't deliberate, more like something that happened when a person kept going despite everything. The candlelight flickered across her face as she fussed with the girls' napkins, making sure no one spilled water or touched the knives. "Girls," she said, lowering her voice, "what do we say?" "Thank you, mister," they chimed in unison. James gave a low chuckle. "Mister, huh? Guess I'll take it." Helen shot him a look halfway between apology and amusement. They're used to the cafe crowd. Everyone's a mister or miss. Makes it easier when you forget names. He nodded, watching her as she arranged 4 small plates for the girls before touching her own menu. She was efficient, quick, a woman who'd learned to do everything at once. "So," he said, his voice steady but quiet, "you run a cafe?" She blinked, surprised he remembered. "Yes. Small place on Maple Street. We do breakfast and pastries mostly. It's humble, but it's ours." The pride in her tone was subtle, but unmistakable. He recognized it, the kind of pride that came from surviving more than from succeeding. The waiter came back, eyes darting nervously between the infamous man at the table and the 4 children now coloring on the back of their menus. James ordered for everyone before Helen could even open her mouth, precise, polite, without a hint of arrogance. "Pasta for them," he said, gesturing toward the girls. "No wine in the sauce. And a steak for the lady. Medium." Helen raised a brow. "You always order for your dates?" "Only when they look like they haven't eaten all day," he said simply. She blinked, caught off guard. Then, reluctantly, she smiled. "You sound like my mother." "Smart woman." "Stubborn woman," Helen corrected, her smile widening just enough to show the dimple at the corner of her mouth. The girls giggled as the bread arrived, tearing it into little pieces and whispering to each other. One dipped her bread into the olive oil, another pretended to sip water like tea. The sight would have made most men uncomfortable, but James found himself strangely still. They didn't know who he was. They weren't afraid. For the first time in a long while, that felt like a gift. The meal began awkwardly. Helen's sentences came in fragments, polite, cautious. She spoke like someone always ready to explain herself. "I should have told Marco," she said finally, breaking the silence. "About the girls." "About me." She sighed. "I wanted one night that wasn't about being the woman with 4 kids." James tilted his head, eyes steady on hers. "You thought I'd judge you. Everyone does. Then they're fools." She looked up sharply, as if expecting sarcasm. There was none. Only quiet certainty in his voice. "They're well-behaved," he added, nodding toward the girls, who were now passing crayons between them like diplomats at a summit. "And brave. You should be proud." Her throat tightened. "I am." Something shifted after that. The distance between them shrank, word by word, minute by minute. Helen told him about the cafe, how she'd started it after losing her husband. "It wasn't the plan," she said. "But plans stopped working a while ago." James didn't press. He only listened, the way men of power rarely did. Every detail, the early mornings, the bills, the exhaustion, built a picture of quiet resilience. When dessert arrived, the girls were deep in conversation about which pasta shape was the best. Ava, self-declared leader, argued for penne. Zara preferred spaghetti because it's like noodles doing gymnastics. James laughed softly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Not the polite chuckle of a businessman, but something real. Something unguarded. He leaned back, studying them all. "This feels wrong," he thought. too peaceful, too bright. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to leave. When Helen excused herself to take one of the girls to the restroom, James found himself alone with the remaining three. They looked at him curiously, unbothered by the weight of his presence. "Do you have kids?" Luna asked suddenly. James shook his head.
No.
"Why not?" He hesitated, surprised by the question. "Guess I never met anyone who made me want them." Mila tilted her head. "You could borrow us." Zara gasped. "You can't just give people away." "But I didn't say forever."
Mila defended.
"Just borrow." James chuckled again, the sound low and genuine. "Maybe I'll take you up on that someday." Helen returned just in time to catch the end of it. She smiled, tired, amused, maybe a little moved.
"They're usually shy. I don't know what it is about you."
"Maybe they can tell I don't scare easy," he said. "Or maybe they can tell you needed someone to talk to." The words landed with quiet precision. She said them casually, but James felt them deeper than she could know. By the time the plates were cleared, the girls were drooping, their energy spent. Helen reached into her bag, pulling out 4 small sweaters and coaxing each into an armhole. It was a choreography of patience, the kind that comes from love layered over exhaustion. James stood and motioned for the check, ignoring her protests. "You don't have to."
"Ido."
His tone left no room for argument. But it wasn't the commanding bark of the man he was known to be. It was softer, almost protective. They walked toward the door together, the storm outside reduced to a drizzle. The girls clung to Helen's skirt until James reached for the umbrella beside the hose stand. He opened it, stepping ahead into the cool night air, holding it above them all. "Come on," he said, voice calm, steady. "Can't have the boss's dinner guests getting wet." Helen laughed.
"Boss."
He froze for half a second, then covered it smoothly. "Old habit. I run a few businesses. The guys at work call me that." She nodded, accepting the explanation without suspicion. "Well, boss, you didn't have to walk us out." "I wanted to." They reached her car, a weathered minivan with a sticker that read Cafe Deadman. Good coffee, honest hearts. James watched as she buckled each child in, whispering small reassurances until all 4 heads drooped against their seats. When she turned back, the rain had stopped. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not walking out. Most men would have." He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he smiled, faint but real. "Maybe next time," he said, "I'll meet all 5 of you on time." Helen blinked, caught between surprise and laughter. "You think there'll be a next time?" He stepped back, giving her space, his voice low. "I'd like there to be." She hesitated, then smiled, that quiet, uncertain kind that felt like the beginning of something fragile. "We'll see, Mr. James." As she drove off, taillights disappearing into the mist, James stood in the empty street, umbrella hanging at his side. For years, every night had ended in silence, the kind that echoed with ghosts. Tonight, for the first time, the silence felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was possibility. And as the last drops of rain slid from the umbrella's edge, James Kaplan, the man who feared nothing, realized he was afraid of only one thing now: losing whatever it was that had just begun. The laughter still lingered when the waiter brought fresh glasses of water to the table. The tension that had once filled Il Voluto, that hush of reverence and fear that always accompanied James Kaplan, had softened into something almost normal. Almost. Helen Deadman sat across from him now, her cheeks still flushed from embarrassment, her rain-damp hair tucked loosely behind one ear. She had the kind of beauty that wasn't deliberate, more like something that happened when a person kept going despite everything. The candlelight flickered across her face as she fussed with the girls' napkins, making sure no one spilled water or touched the knives. "Girls," she said, lowering her voice, "what do we say?" "Thank you, mister," they chimed in unison. James gave a low chuckle. "Mister, huh? Guess I'll take it." Helen shot him a look halfway between apology and amusement. They're used to the cafe crowd. Everyone's a Mr. or Miss. Makes it easier when you forget names. He nodded, watching her as she arranged 4 small plates for the girls before touching her own menu. She was efficient, quick, a woman who'd learned to do everything at once. "So," he said, his voice steady but quiet, "you run a cafe?" She blinked, surprised he remembered.
Yes.
"Small place on Maple Street. We do breakfast and pastries mostly. It's humble, but it's ours." The pride in her tone was subtle, but unmistakable. He recognized it, the kind of pride that came from surviving more than from succeeding. The waiter came back, eyes darting nervously between the infamous man at the table and the 4 children now coloring on the back of their menus. James ordered for everyone before Helen could even open her mouth, precise, polite, without a hint of arrogance. "Pasta for them," he said, gesturing toward the girls. "No wine in the sauce."
And a steak for the lady.
"Medium." Helen raised a brow. "You always order for your dates?" "Only when they look like they haven't eaten all day," he said simply. She blinked, caught off guard. Then, reluctantly, she smiled. "You sound like my mother." "Smart woman." "Stubborn woman," Helen corrected, her smile widening just enough to show the dimple at the corner of her mouth. The girls giggled as the bread arrived, tearing it into little pieces and whispering to each other. One dipped her bread into the olive oil, another pretended to sip water, like tea. The sight would have made most men uncomfortable, but James found himself strangely still. They didn't know who he was. They weren't afraid. For the first time in a long while, that felt like a gift. The meal began awkwardly. Helen's sentences came in fragments, polite, cautious. She spoke like someone always ready to explain herself. "I should have told Marco," she said finally, breaking the silence. "About the girls."
About me.
She sighed. "I wanted one night that wasn't about being the woman with 4 kids." James tilted his head, eyes steady on hers. "You thought I'd judge you. Everyone does. Then they're fools." She looked up sharply, as if expecting sarcasm. There was none, only quiet certainty in his voice. "They're well-behaved," he added, nodding toward the girls, who were now passing crayons between them like diplomats at a summit. "And brave. You should be proud." Her throat tightened. "I am." Something shifted after that. The distance between them shrank, word by word, minute by minute. Helen told him about the cafe, how she'd started it after losing her husband. "It wasn't the plan," she said, "but plans stopped working a while ago." James didn't press. He only listened, the way men of power rarely did. Every detail, the early mornings, the bills, the exhaustion, built a picture of quiet resilience. When dessert arrived, the girls were deep in conversation about which pasta shape was the best. Ava, self-declared leader, argued for penne. Zara preferred spaghetti because it's like noodles doing gymnastics. James laughed softly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Not the polite chuckle of a businessman, but something real. Something unguarded. He leaned back, studying them all. This feels wrong, he thought. Too peaceful. Too bright. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to leave. When Helen excused herself to take one of the girls to the restroom, James found himself alone with the remaining 3. They looked at him curiously, unbothered by the weight of his presence. "Do you have kids?" Luna asked suddenly. James shook his head.
No.
"Why not?" He hesitated, surprised by the question. "Guess I never met anyone who made me want them." Mila tilted her head. "You could borrow us." Zara gasped. "You can't just give people away." "But I didn't say forever."
Mila defended.
"Just borrow." James chuckled again, the sound low and genuine. "Maybe I'll take you up on that someday." Helen returned just in time to catch the end of it. She smiled, tired, amused, maybe a little moved.
They're usually shy. I don't know what it is about you.
Maybe they can tell I don't scare easy, he said. Or maybe they can tell you needed someone to talk to. The words landed with quiet precision. She said them casually, but James felt them deeper than she could know. By the time the plates were cleared, the girls were drooping, their energy spent. Helen reached into her bag, pulling out 4 small sweaters and coaxing each into an armhole. It was a choreography of patience, the kind that comes from love layered over exhaustion. James stood and motioned for the check, ignoring her protests. You don't have to.
Ida.
His tone left no room for argument. But it wasn't the commanding bark of the man he was known to be. It was softer, almost protective. They walked toward the door together, the storm outside reduced to a drizzle. The girls clung to Helen's skirt until James reached for the umbrella beside the host stand. He opened it, stepping ahead into the cool night air, holding it above them all. Come on, he said, voice calm, steady. Can't have the boss's dinner guests getting wet. Helen laughed.
Boss.
He froze for half a second, then covered it smoothly. Old habit. I run a few businesses. The guys at work call me that. She nodded, accepting the explanation without suspicion. Well, boss, you didn't have to walk us out. I wanted to. They reached her car, a weathered minivan with a sticker that read Cafe Deadman. Good coffee, honest hearts. James watched as she buckled each child in, whispering small reassurances until all 4 heads drooped against their seats. When she turned back, the rain had stopped. Thank you, she said softly, for not walking out. Most men would have. He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he smiled, faint but real. Maybe next time, he said, I'll meet all 5 of you on time. Helen blinked, caught between surprise and laughter. You think there'll be a next time? He stepped back, giving her space, his voice low. I'd like there to be. She hesitated, then smiled, that quiet, uncertain kind that felt like the beginning of something fragile. We'll see, Mr. James. As she drove off, taillights disappearing into the mist, James stood in the empty street, umbrella hanging at his side. For years, every night had ended in silence, the kind that echoed with ghosts. Tonight, for the first time, the silence felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was possibility. And as the last drops of rain slid from the umbrella's edge, James Kaplan, the man who feared nothing, realized he was afraid of only one thing now, losing whatever it was that had just begun. Morning broke over the city like a warning. From the top floor of the Kaplan Tower, glass walls offered a sweeping view of the skyline, sharp, cold, indifferent. Down below, men moved through streets that bore his silent claim.
Trucks. Clubs.
Warehouses. Every piece of steel and smoke in that sprawl carried a shadow. James Kaplan watched it all with his usual precision, but today his thoughts were miles away. Back in a candlelit restaurant where 4 little girls had laughed at his tattoos and a woman had looked him in the eye without fear. A knock broke the silence. Marco stepped in, sleeves rolled up, gold chain glinting. Morning, boss. You're early. James didn't look away from the window. I never left.
Marco arched a brow.
Could have fooled me. The guy said you didn't answer your phone last night. I figured you were either dead or in love. James turned then, slow and deliberate. I'm not dead.
Marco grinned.
Didn't deny the other part. James's expression didn't change, but his silence said enough. The meeting room smelled of cigar smoke and burnt espresso. 5 lieutenants sat around the table, men who could order death with the same ease as lunch. Rossi's crew moved into the docks again, one reported. They're using our shipments as cover. James leaned forward, elbows on the table. Then burn their cover. The man hesitated. That's not a suggestion. The room went still. His voice carried no anger, just the cold weight of command. For years, that tone had built his empire. One deal, one threat, one unflinching decision at a time. But today, Even as he gave orders, his focus wavered. His mind drifted, not to numbers or deaths, but to a woman brushing rain from her hair and a child saying, "Please don't leave." Marco caught it. He always did. When the others cleared out, Marco dropped into a chair opposite him. "You've been off since last night. You meet her?" James looked up from the stack of reports. "I did."
Marco whistled.
"So?" She breathed fire or break hearts. "She had kids." "Kids." Marco nearly choked. "Plural." "Four." "Four." Marco laughed, low and incredulous. "The boss has a crush on a woman with 4 kids?" James said nothing. Just smirked, faint and unreadable. "That's new," Marco said. "You usually go for the ones who don't even remember your name the next day." "This one," James said quietly, "I'll remember." Something in his tone made Marco's grin fade. By noon, the day had bled into its usual chaos.
Deals. Calls.
Numbers. A fight broke out at one of the clubs. James handled it with surgical calm, issuing orders that ended the problem before it began. Efficiency.
Control. Discipline.
The trinity that had built his empire and hollowed out everything else. But every time his phone buzzed, every time the elevator doors opened, he caught himself half expecting to see a text, a face, a flash of red ribbons. When it didn't come, he pushed the thought down like a habit he couldn't afford. That night, the office emptied early. Rain tapped against the glass again, softer this time, almost like memory repeating itself. James poured himself a drink, amber liquid catching the skyline's reflection. For a moment, he stood alone with it, lost somewhere between 2 worlds, the one he'd built out of blood and silence, and the one he'd glimpsed over dinner with a woman who smiled through exhaustion. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he knew what haunting felt like. And Helen Deadman, her voice, her laugh, her daughter's innocent chaos, haunted him. The past had taught him that silence was safer than sentiment. But the past had also broken him. He could still see it, his father's face, the night it happened. James had been 16, standing in a cold warehouse, his shoes slipping on spilled oil as men shouted around him. His father had been the kind of man who thought loyalty was armor. It wasn't. One bullet proved that. The sound of it, that single crack, split James's world in half. By dawn, his father was dead, his mother gone, and the boy who still believed in right and wrong was buried with them. The man who rose in his place had built everything on one rule: never need anyone. And yet, here he was, thinking about a woman who'd apologized for being late and 4 children who'd made him smile. "You're slipping," he told himself. "You can't afford to slip." Marco interrupted his thoughts again later that night, knocking before entering with a folder in hand. "Got the new contracts for the South End." James gestured to the desk. "Leave them."
Marco hesitated.
"You sure you're good, boss? You've been quiet all day. Even quieter than usual, I mean." James leaned back, expression unreadable.
"Ay fine. Marco es Norted. Right."
"And I'm the Pope." James's lips twitched, the ghost of a smirk. "Go home, Marco. Tell your wife I said congratulations on still putting up with you.
Ah.
You should try that domestic life yourself, boss. Maybe it'll make you less terrifying." James didn't answer. When Marco left, the office felt cavernous again. Empty, like it always did when the noise faded. He sat there a while, staring at his phone, at the blank screen that should have been easy to ignore. But the silence of it pressed heavier with every passing minute, until, finally, it buzzed. A single message lit the screen. "Helen Deadman. Thank you for not walking out." He stared at it longer than he should have, reading it twice, maybe 3 times. Something inside him, something long dormant, shifted. He typed back, "Thank your girls. They made me stay." He hesitated before hitting send, as if unsure what line he was crossing. Then he sent it anyway. Minutes later, a second notification came through.
Not a text this time.
A photo. Accidental, probably, he could tell by the blur. The picture showed the girls curled up on a couch, tangled together beneath a single blanket. A stuffed rabbit poked out between them. In the background, just visible, Helen stood by a window, holding a cup of tea, her profile lit by soft lamplight. James felt something uncoil in his chest, not pain, exactly, but the ache that came when a man realized how much of his life had been spent alone. He traced the image with his thumb, then locked the phone before he could think too much about it. But the picture burned behind his eyes long after the screen went dark. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and restless. James poured another drink, but this one he didn't finish. He sat instead, leaning back in his chair, eyes on the window. The reflection staring back wasn't the man people feared. It was someone quieter, almost human. For years, he'd told himself love was a weakness, that needing someone meant giving them a weapon. But maybe, he thought, weakness wasn't in caring. Maybe it was in forgetting how. The rain began again, steady, deliberate, and for the first time, James didn't mind the sound. He reached for his phone once more, glanced at the photo, and allowed himself a faint, tired smile. Somewhere, in a warm house that smelled like coffee and crayons, for little girls were asleep, and a woman who didn't know his past had thanked him for staying. He had no right to that kind of peace. But tonight, he let himself pretend. Tomorrow, the shadows would return, they always did. But for now, James Kaplan, the man who once believed redemption was for other people, sat in the quiet glow of the city he ruled and felt, for the first time in years, like he didn't want to be alone. The bell above the door chimed softly as James Kaplan stepped into Café Deadman. The scent hit him first, roasted coffee, vanilla, and something faintly citrus, the kind of warmth that didn't exist in his world of smoke and steel. It was Saturday morning, and the little café buzzed with chatter and the clinking of porcelain cups. Sunlight spilled through the windows, catching on the sugar jars and chrome fixtures. But all of it dimmed when 4 familiar voices shrieked in unison. "Mr. James." Every head in the café turned. Before he could even reply, 4 small figures burst out from behind the counter. Identical giggles, identical dresses, this time yellow instead of red. They rushed at him like a miniature army of sunshine, surrounding his legs, tugging on his coat. "You came," Zara shouted. "You said you might," Luna added. Ava crossed her arms. "I told them you would." Mila, shy as ever, just hugged his knee and smiled. James crouched down to their level, the corner of his mouth lifting despite himself. "How could I not? I had a debt to repay." "For what?" Ava demanded. "For making me smile last time." Helen appeared behind the counter, wiping her hands on an apron. When she saw him, she froze mid-motion. For a split second, surprise flickered across her face, followed by something softer, more uncertain. "Well," she said, composing herself, "I wasn't expecting you." James straightened, unbothered by the curious glances from her 2 baristas whispering near the espresso machine. "I owed your daughters a visit." One of the staff murmured just loud enough for another to hear, "That man looks dangerous." Helen shot them a look that silenced any further gossip. Then she turned back, trying to read his expression. "Coffee, please." She poured it herself, the way she would for a regular. "Do you take sugar?"
No.
"Of course not," she murmured, almost smiling. He took a seat at a small corner table, and within seconds the girls crowded around him. The table was too small for 5, but they made it work, elbows bumping, crayons rolling across the wood. "We made cupcakes today," Luna announced. "Mama let us frost them. Best frosting ever," Mila added solemnly. James gestured toward the display case. "Those are yours." The girls nodded, proud and expectant. He turned to Helen. "How many are there?" 12. "Don't tell me you're thinking." "I'll take all of them." Helen blinked. "All?"
All.
She laughed under her breath. You can't eat 12 cupcakes, James. I won't, but I can buy them. The girls gasped in delight. Ava looked scandalized. That's a lot of cupcakes, Mr. James. Then it's a good thing I know for people who can help me eat them. The sound of their laughter, bright and unrestrained, filled the cafe. Even Helen's staff, once wary, couldn't help but smile. The sight of their boss being cornered by 4 toddlers with frosting-covered fingers was enough to soften anyone. For a man whose hands had built an empire on fear, James looked almost human. Helen joined him once the rush died down. She carried a tray of coffee refills and sat across from him, her apron dusted with flour. You didn't have to do that, she said, glancing toward the now empty cupcake case. I wanted to. Careful, she teased. You keep this up, they'll think you're Santa. Too young for that kind of disappointment, he said. Her smile faded, replaced by something quieter. You're not what I expected. James arched a brow. What did you expect? Someone colder.
Harder, maybe.
He took a slow sip of his coffee. That's still an option. But there was no threat in it, just dry humor and a flicker of something sad in his eyes. Helen studied him for a moment, then looked down, fidgeting with her cup. I haven't done this in a long time, she admitted softly. What, talk to a man who doesn't smile much? Talk to anyone who isn't a customer or one of my kids. She laughed lightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I haven't dated since my husband died. James's hand froze around his cup. She said it casually, as though repeating something she'd long accepted, but the words landed like a stone. He was a police officer, she continued. 3 years ago. Wrong place, wrong time. They said it was a crossfire during some operation downtown. James felt his pulse thud once, sharp and cold. Downtown. 3 years ago. A crossfire.
He remembered that night.
He'd been there, not personally, but one of his men had been. The operation had gone sideways, bullets flying where none should have. A cop dead by mistake. Helen's husband. She didn't know. And God help him, she couldn't. He swallowed hard, his face unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, his voice low. For what it's worth. She nodded, grateful for the sincerity. It's worth something. Most people avoid saying anything at all. I don't avoid much. No, she said softly. You don't seem the type. The girls came back carrying folded sheets of paper, breaking the tension with their giggles. We made you something. James blinked as Ava proudly handed over 4 crayon drawings, each slightly different, but unmistakably chaotic. One showed stick figures, 4 tiny girls holding hands with a very tall man in a suit. Another had a big pink heart scrawled above the words Mr. James and us. He looked at the pictures, then at them. You drew this for me? Yup, Luna said. So you won't forget us. His throat tightened. He folded each drawing carefully and slid them into his jacket pocket. That won't happen. Promise.
Mila whispered.
Promise. Helen watched the exchange with quiet wonder. She hadn't seen someone treat her daughters like that in years, not with indulgence, not with patience. Most men saw 4 kids as 4 reasons to run. James didn't run. He sat there like he belonged. And yet there was something about him. Something she couldn't quite name. The way people looked at him when he entered, the quiet authority in his movements, the weight in his silence. He didn't feel dangerous, not to her, but the world around him seemed to bend differently. Still, when he caught her watching, he only gave a small, almost shy smile. Maybe next time, he said, I'll bring something better than cupcakes. Good luck topping that, she said. When closing time came, James stayed to help wipe down the tables, an offer Helen tried to refuse, but he ignored. The girls sat at the counter, half asleep and sugar-drunk, their heads resting against each other. Outside, the street was quiet. James held the door for her as she carried out a bag of trash, and for a moment, they stood under the cafe's flickering sign, the air cool and heavy with dusk. Helen looked up at him. You don't talk much, do you? He shrugged. I say what matters. And what matters now? His gaze lingered on her face, the tired grace, the strength. That you keep smiling like that. Her breath caught. She looked away quickly, flustered. You should go before I start thinking you're good at this.
He smirked.
Too late. He left after that, the bell chiming softly behind him. But the moment he stepped outside, two men detached from the alley's shadows. His men, ever watchful. One of them, a lean figure with sharp eyes, spoke first. Boss, he said quietly. That woman, you know her husband was law enforcement, right? James's jaw tightened. I know. You sure about this? James looked back at the cafe window. Inside, Helen was laughing at something one of her girls said, her smile bright beneath the amber lights. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, his voice came steady, certain.
Yeah, he said.
I'm sure. The men exchanged glances, but said nothing more. As James walked toward his car, the drawings in his pocket rustled faintly with each step. He didn't pull them out, he didn't need to. He already saw them every time he closed his eyes. 4 cupcakes. 4 smiles. 1 heart that didn't know how much danger it was in, or how much it had already changed his own. The first chill of autumn had settled over the city, crisp and golden. The kind of weather that made ordinary people think of warmth, of scarves and coffee and slow Sundays. For James Kaplan, warmth was a new language he was just beginning to understand. He'd been spending his mornings at the cafe, arriving early enough to help Helen set up before customers trickled in. She never asked him to, she didn't have to. He liked the rhythm of it, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of the girls as they argued over who got to sprinkle cinnamon on the foam, the way Helen's laughter filled the air like music. He liked the way she looked when she worked, focused, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back, her smile bright even when she was exhausted. Sometimes he wondered how someone could look so gentle and still carry so much strength. But Helen noticed the shadows too, the moments when he'd fall silent, staring out the window too long, his phone buzzing with calls he never answered in front of her. He'd excuse himself for business, always vague, always distant when he returned. She'd learned not to pry. Still, a question lingered between them, silent but growing. Who are you really? One evening, after closing, the cafe was quiet except for the hum of the radio. The girls had fallen asleep on the couch in the corner, worn out from a day of baking. Helen poured James another cup of coffee and sat across from him. You know, she said softly, you never talk about what you do. He didn't look up. Maybe it's boring. Nothing about you is boring, James. There was a small smile in her voice, but also a tremor. You're different. Kind, but you carry yourself like someone who's always waiting for something bad to happen. He met her eyes. For a second, he thought about telling her everything, the truth about who he was, what he'd done. But the image of her daughters laughing at his side stopped him cold. I'm not a good man, Helen, he said finally. Her eyes softened. Maybe not, but you're trying to be. He wanted to believe that. That night, when he walked them to their car, Helen leaned against the door, hesitant. James, she murmured, whatever it is you're not saying someday, I hope you trust me enough to tell me. He nodded once, though his chest felt heavier than it should have. Someday, he said. The someday came sooner than either of them expected. 2 nights later, Helen was closing up the cafe when the television in the corner caught her attention. She almost turned it off. The news was always bad lately, but something in the anchor's voice made her look up. A major crackdown tonight on the Kaplan Syndicate, one of the city's most powerful criminal networks. Sources confirmed that authorities have linked the organization's activities to years of extortion, racketeering, and homicide. At the center of it all, the elusive figure known as James Kaplan. Helen froze. The photo that flashed on screen was unmistakable.
James.
Her James. The breath left her lungs. The cup in her hand slipped, shattering against the floor. The anchor's voice blurred, drowned by the sound of her heartbeat roaring in her ears. She couldn't move at first, couldn't think. Images flooded her mind. His quiet intensity, the way people seemed to fear him without reason, the whispers when he entered the cafe. The things she'd brushed off suddenly made sense in ways she didn't want them to. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. "Oh my God." The girls stirred from their nap, blinking sleepily. "Mommy?" Ava asked. "What's wrong?" Helen forced a trembling smile. "Nothing, baby. Go back to sleep." But her hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. James was still at his penthouse when her message came through. "Helen, where are you?" He frowned. "Home."
Why?
No reply. A minute later, his phone buzzed again. "Helen, I need to see you."
Now.
He found her standing outside the cafe, the lights off behind her, her arms crossed tightly against the cold. The wind caught her hair, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked afraid. "Helen." She turned slowly, her eyes raw with disbelief. "It's true, isn't it?" He hesitated. That single pause, that heartbeat of silence, was answer enough. Her voice broke. "The Kaplan Syndicate. The killings. The extortion. All of it. She stopped herself, shaking her head. "You're him." James took a step closer. "Helen."
Don't, she snapped.
"Don't come any closer."
He stopped.
The distance between them felt like a chasm. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was sharp as glass. "You let me bring my kids around a killer?" He flinched. The word killer landed harder than any bullet ever had. "I'd die before I let my world touch yours," he said quietly. "You have to believe that." "Believe you?" Her laugh was short, broken. "You lied to me."
To them.
God, James, my husband died because of people like you." His breath caught. He wanted to tell her how true that was, that it had been his operation, his men, his fault, but the words wouldn't come. He took another step forward, desperate. "Helen, please." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Leave." "Helen." "Leave, James."
Now.
The door to the cafe slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the empty street. James stood there for a long moment, the wind cutting through him, until finally he turned away. The next day, he didn't go to the cafe. Or the next. Or the one after that. But his world didn't stop demanding his attention. Marco found him sitting in his office, the city's pulse throbbing outside the glass. "You look like hell," Marco said bluntly. "What happened?" James didn't answer. He just stared at the stack of ledgers on his desk, the numbers blurring together.
Marco frowned.
"Boss, the docks are on fire again. Rossi's crew hit another shipment. Let them." "Let them?" Marco's tone hardened. "Since when do we roll over?" James stood, walking to the window. "Since I started getting tired of building things that only destroy." Marco stared at him, baffled. "You're serious?" "I'm cleaning house," James said simply. "Everything dirty, sell it, burn it, bury it. I want out." "You think walking away fixes it?"
Marco demanded.
"You can undo the blood, James. I can damn well stop adding to it." For once, Marco didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. Because of her. James didn't deny it. Nights stretched longer after that. The mansion that had once been filled with people now echoed with silence.
No laughter. No voices.
Just empty rooms and the faint sound of rain against glass. James spent hours in his study, the city lights flickering below, the scent of whiskey untouched beside him. He tried not to look at his phone, the one that still held her number, her messages, the photo she'd sent by accident of her girls sleeping on the couch. But eventually he gave in. He unlocked the screen and stared at the image, 4 small faces, serene and safe. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the folded crayon drawings he'd kept there. "Mr. James and us." The paper was smudged now, edges worn from being handled too many times. He laid the drawings on his desk and stared at them for a long while, the ache in his chest both sharp and familiar. Finally, he whispered into the quiet, "You deserve better than me." The words hung there, heavy and unchanging. Outside, the storm rolled over the city, his city, washing its sins clean for a few fleeting moments before the darkness crept back in. And for the first time in years, James Kaplan, the man who owned the night, felt like he was the one being erased by it. The city was burning again metaphorically, then literally. In the weeks since Helen had found out who he was, James Kaplan's world had started to fracture. He didn't answer. He moved past her, scanning the damage, the scorch marks, the shattered glass, the smell of gasoline.
His jaw tightened. Who did this?
I don't know, she stammered. They just... Her voice broke as he turned to her. Was anyone hurt? She shook her head.
No.
But the girls... He was already moving. Inside, the girls clung to each other behind the counter. When they saw him, they ran forward, crying, "Mr. James." He knelt, gathering all four into his arms, their little hands clutching his coat. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe now. I promise." Helen stood by the door, frozen, watching the way he held them, gentle but fierce. Something in her chest twisted painfully. When he finally stood, his eyes were different. Cold again. Focused. The softness she'd seen in recent weeks was gone, replaced by something dangerous and deeply human. "I'm calling someone to watch the cafe," he said. "You need to take the girls and go home." She frowned. "James, what are you?" "Don't argue." His tone was sharper than he meant, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "Please, Helen. Go." She saw it then. The guilt, the fury, the grief tangled beneath his control. And she realized, with a kind of horror, that this wasn't random. Someone had sent him a message. "This was because of you," she whispered.
He didn't deny it.
Her voice trembled. "They could have killed my daughters." His jaw clenched. "I know. That's supposed to make it better?" "No," his voice broke. "But it means I'll make sure it never happens again." An hour later, the Rossi brothers' warehouse on the east side went up in flames. No one could prove who ordered it, but every man in the underworld knew exactly who had sent the warning in return. James fought that day, not just with bullets or orders, but with something deeper. Every strike he ordered, every threat he issued, came not from vengeance, but from desperation. He had crossed every line imaginable to keep control of his empire. But for the first time, he was crossing them to protect someone outside of it. Helen and the girls. By nightfall, the street outside the cafe was deserted again. The police had come and gone. The windows were boarded up. Helen sat on the curb, her daughters asleep in the back of her car. James approached quietly. His jacket was torn, his knuckles bruised, his eyes heavy. "You shouldn't be here," she said, not looking up. "I had to make sure you were safe." "Safe." She laughed bitterly. "Because of you, I had to explain to my kids why men would hurt a place that sells muffins." He flinched but didn't speak. Helen stood, her anger fading into exhaustion. "I don't know who you think you're protecting, James, but I can't do this. I can't live wondering if the next knock on the door is meant for you or for us." "I know," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have to." She crossed her arms, her voice trembling. "Then leave us alone." He took a slow breath, eyes glinting with something fierce and sorrowful. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I told you I'd never let my world touch yours." He looked around, the scorch marks, the broken glass, the shadows clinging to every corner. "And I failed." Her silence was the only answer. "I won't fail again," he said softly. Before she could respond, he stepped closer and pressed something into her hand, a small silver key. "Safe house. North side. Stay there tonight. Marco's men will guard the place until morning." "James." He met her eyes, and for a heartbeat, all the walls between them fell away. Please, he said. Let me do this one thing right. Helen hesitated, then nodded once. Just tonight. He gave a faint, grateful smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's enough. Hours later, in a safe house far from the city center, Helen tucked her daughters into bed. They fell asleep quickly, worn out by fear and confusion. She sat by the window, the key heavy in her hand, her mind replaying everything, his voice, his promise, the look in his eyes when he said, "I failed." Outside, distant sirens wailed. She didn't know if James was out there fighting again, or if he was finally resting. But she did know this. Whatever he was, whatever darkness he carried, he had chosen to stand between it and her family. And that terrified her more than anything, because part of her still wanted to believe he could. Meanwhile, across town, James stood alone in the ruins of one of his warehouses, the fire still crackling around him.
Marco approached cautiously.
You win tonight, boss. Rossil back off. James didn't move. He watched the flames eat through the steel beams, the smoke curling toward the stars. This wasn't winning, he said quietly.
Marco frowned.
Then what was it? James looked back toward the city lights, the direction of the cafe, the safe house, the woman who'd made him want to be something more than a shadow. It was me keeping my promise, he said, no matter what it costs. The firelight caught the edge of his expression, determined, exhausted, human. I told her I wouldn't let my world touch hers, he whispered. I failed once. I won't again. And as the flames devoured what was left of the empire he'd built, James Kaplan turned away from the destruction, not as a king losing his throne, but as a man finally learning what it meant to protect something worth saving. The world went still after the fire. For weeks, the city whispered about it, about how the once mighty Kaplan empire had gone silent overnight. The docks, the clubs, the shadow markets, all closed without warning. His men scattered, rivals confused. Power, it seemed, had been traded for peace. But James didn't care about the city anymore. He cared about a single house tucked on a quiet street, where laughter had once greeted him and now refused to return his calls. Helen hadn't answered any of his messages since that night. He didn't blame her. He only hoped she and the girls were safe. When he finally saw them again, it wasn't planned. He was driving past Maple Street when he noticed the cafe lights flicker on before dawn. Curiosity, or maybe longing, pulled him to stop. Through the window, he saw Helen standing behind the counter, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired but calm. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed the sight of her until that moment. Then, as if summoned by fate, four small figures appeared from the back room, each holding a tiny broom or rag, helping their mother prepare for another day. It hit him harder than any bullet ever had. He stepped inside.
The bell chimed.
The girls looked up, and in an instant, the silence broke. Mr. James. Before Helen could react, they rushed him, a blur of yellow pajamas and sleepy smiles. Ava threw her arms around his leg. Luna tugged his sleeve. Mila hid behind her sisters, shy but smiling. And Zara, ever fearless, beamed. You came back. Helen's voice was soft, guarded.
Girls.
Give Mr. James some space. But she didn't sound angry, just uncertain. James crouched down, meeting their eyes. You all right? Ava nodded seriously. The bad men didn't come back. Luna added, Mommy said they won't. Mila whispered, You scared them away. And Zara said proudly, You were brave, Mr. James. Something in his chest cracked open. He looked up at Helen, whose gaze softened just slightly. After the girls went to the back to get ready for school, Helen handed him a mug of coffee. It wasn't an invitation to stay, but it wasn't dismissal either. Thank you, he said quietly. She shrugged, eyes down. It's just coffee. They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the espresso machine filling the air. Finally she spoke. I heard what you've been doing. He raised an eyebrow. What have you heard? That you've been closing your businesses. donating money to the families affected by your past life. Her voice trembled slightly. You think that erases it? He shook his head.
No.
Nothing erases it. Then why do it? He looked down at the dark surface of his coffee. Because it's a start. Because maybe the only thing worse than living with my mistakes is doing nothing to change what comes after them. Helen watched him, her expression unreadable. You're trying to wash away your sins. He looked up, meeting her eyes. No, he said softly. I'm trying to deserve you. Her breath caught. There was no arrogance in his tone, no manipulation, just a truth that felt both impossible and sincere. She wanted to tell him it wasn't that simple. That forgiveness wasn't something a person could buy with good deeds. But looking at him, she saw what most couldn't. The quiet exhaustion, the raw remorse carved into every line of his face. He wasn't the man she'd met at Il Valido months ago, the one who ruled a city with silence and fear. He looked like a man stripped bare, fighting ghosts only he could see. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said finally. I'm not asking you to, he replied. Just let me show you I can be better. In the weeks that followed, James made good on his word. He sold off the last of his illegal businesses and transferred ownership of several warehouses to charities and community projects under anonymous foundations. Families who'd once suffered under the Kaplan name found envelopes on their doorsteps, containing cash, letters of apology with no signature. Marco, ever loyal, watched the transformation with disbelief. You're really doing this, huh? James didn't look up from the papers he was signing. I'm done being a ghost that scares people. I want to be someone my name doesn't destroy.
Marco es Nortez.
You're going legit. Something like that. You do realize the city won't fear you anymore. Good. Marco studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You really love her, don't you? James's pen stilled. More than I ever thought I could love anything. Helen saw the changes too, though she tried not to. Every day, someone came into her cafe with a story. A man whose brother's medical bills had been paid by an anonymous donor. A woman whose missing rent money suddenly reappeared with interest. A neighborhood kids program that received a massive grant overnight. And always, the same name whispered behind it.
Kaplan.
She didn't know how to feel. Part of her wanted to believe it was redemption. The other part whispered that redemption didn't undo the past. Still, when James walked into her cafe one late afternoon, dressed in his usual dark suit but without the weight he used to carry, she didn't send him away. He ordered a coffee, sat at his usual corner table. The girls ran to greet him again, filling the shop with laughter. And for the first time, Helen didn't stop them. She joined him after closing, sitting across the table, hands clasped together. You keep coming back, she said softly. I told you I would. She hesitated. I don't know what to do with you, James. Don't do anything, he said simply. Just let me be here. The simplicity of it disarmed her. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or a future. He was asking to exist in the same world as her without hurting it. And somehow, that was more powerful than any promise of love could have been. As the evening faded into dusk, the girls finished their homework at the counter. The cafe glowed in warm amber light, filled with the hum of quiet contentment. Helen watched him with them, helping Ava spell a word, untangling Luna's hair ribbon, laughing softly at one of Zara's impossible questions. It didn't look like a man pretending. It looked like a man finally at peace. When she came over to close for the night, he stood to leave. Thank you for letting me stay, he said. She hesitated, then reached out, her hand finding his. It was the first time she'd touched him since the night she told him to leave. James froze, looking down at their joined hands. Her fingers were warm, steady. I can't promise anything, she said quietly. Not yet. I don't need a promise. But, her voice softened. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you're not trying to wash away your sins. Maybe you're trying to build something new. His gaze lifted to hers, something unspoken passing between them. Maybe, he murmured, and maybe, someday, I'll deserve what I found. The cafe clock ticked softly in the background. For the first time since their worlds collided, the air between them wasn't filled with tension or fear, but with something tender and uncertain. Forgiveness hadn't been given, but it had begun. And as Helen turned off the lights, her hand still loosely holding his, James realized redemption didn't come in grand gestures or miracles. It came in quiet moments, like the one where a woman who once called him a monster finally let him stay. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual noise, but for James Kaplan, the world felt still. He looked down at their intertwined hands and whispered, more to himself than to her. Maybe peace was never meant to be taken. Maybe it's something you earn, one heartbeat at a time. A full year had passed since the night fire licked at the edges of James Kaplan's empire. The city still whispered his name, but no longer with the same fear. The underworld he'd once ruled now regarded him with a mix of disbelief and respect. The man who had walked away, the man who'd chosen peace over power.
Some called him weak.
Others said he'd gone mad. But for those who truly knew him, they understood. James Kaplan had finally found something stronger than fear. He had found a reason to live. It was a Saturday morning when he arrived at the cafe, the bell above the door chiming a familiar welcome. And he didn't regret it for a second. Around noon, Marco himself wandered in jeans instead of his usual suit, a rare sight. He leaned against the counter, watching James pour hot chocolate for the girls. "Would you look at this?" Marco said with a grin. The great James Kaplan, warlord of the South End, now serving cocoa and wiping noses. James didn't even glance up. "They pay better than you ever did."
Ah.
"I'll bet they do. Respect's gone to your head, boss." "I told you to stop calling me that." Yeah. Marco slid onto a stool. "Still feels weird seeing you like this. You've traded guns for teacups, you know." James finally looked up, his smile quiet but sure. "Best trade I ever made." Marco laughed, shaking his head. "You used to terrify people. Now you're a local hero. There's got to be a middle ground somewhere." "Maybe," James said, glancing toward Helen and the girls. "But I like this end better." Marco's grin softened. "You deserve it, boss. Took a hell of a long road to get here." James nodded once.
Yeah.
"But some roads are worth the pain." The afternoon passed in easy rhythm. Customers came and went, drawn by the warmth that seemed to radiate from the small cafe. Helen moved gracefully among the tables, laughing easily, the girls darting between customers delivering napkins and smiles. James watched them quietly, polishing a stack of cups that didn't really need polishing. For the first time in his life, he felt still. Not powerful, not feared, just still.
And it was enough.
That evening, after the last customer left and the closed sign turned over, Helen locked the door and leaned against it with a sigh. "Another full day," she said, stretching her arms. "We sold out of every pastry again." "Good problem to have," James said, hanging up his apron. "Thanks to your charm," she teased. "Half the city comes here hoping to see the reformed Mafia boss." He raised an eyebrow. "And the other half? They come for the cupcakes." He laughed, deep and genuine. Helen stepped closer, her tone softening. "You've really built something here, James. Something real." He met her gaze, voice low. "You built it, Helen. I just got lucky enough to stand beside you." Her smile faltered slightly, replaced by something more vulnerable. "You really let it all go, didn't you? The empire, the money, the fear." "Fear was never real power," he said. "Love is." Helen's breath hitched, the air between them charged but calm. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "That life." "Sometimes," he admitted. "The control. The certainty." But then, he glanced toward the back of the cafe, where the girls were playing with crayons and dolls on the floor. Then I hear them laugh, and I remember why I walked away. Helen's eyes shimmered. You changed everything, James.
For them.
For me. He took a slow step closer. You changed me first. Later that night, they sat on the couch in the cafe's small back room. The girls had begged for a story before bed, and James, as promised, obliged. And the dragon, realizing the princess didn't need saving, put down his sword and decided to guard her kingdom instead. He finished, closing the book. For pairs of sleepy eyes blinked up at him. Does the dragon get to stay? Ava asked, yawning. James smiled. If he's lucky, yes. Good, Luna mumbled, curling up against her sisters. 'Cause he's nice. Within minutes, all four were asleep, their breathing steady, faces peaceful. Helen tucked a blanket around them, her fingers brushing James's as they both lingered there, watching the girls dream. She's right, you know, Helen whispered. You're nice. He chuckled softly. Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to maintain. You had one, she corrected. Now you have something better. He looked at her, the candlelight flickering against her face. What's that? A life. They stepped outside after locking up, the city quiet around them. A cool breeze drifted down the street, carrying the scent of rain. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Helen broke the silence first. Do you ever wonder if you deserve this? The peace. All the time, he said honestly. But I stopped trying to answer it. Peace doesn't come to those who deserve it. It comes to those who fight for it. She turned toward him, eyes soft. And what are you fighting for now? He reached for her hand, hesitating for only a heartbeat before taking it. You. Her fingers tightened around his. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them carried a kind of quiet certainty, the peace of two people who had finally found their way back to each other after everything. Helen looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. You make us feel safe, James. Even in your darkness. He exhaled slowly, his thumb brushing her hand. That's because you taught me what light feels like. She smiled, a small, radiant thing that warmed him more than the city's lights ever could. As they stood there, the rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. Helen didn't move away. Neither did he. For once, James Kaplan didn't think about who he had been, or what the world called him. He only thought about this, her hand in his, the laughter of four little girls behind the cafe windows, and the quiet promise of a life he never thought he'd have. And as the rain washed the city clean, James finally believed that redemption wasn't just something you earned. It was something you lived, day by day, choice by choice, heartbeat by heartbeat. He looked at Helen and whispered, almost to himself, This is the best thing I've ever done right. Helen smiled, her eyes glistening. Then keep doing it. And under the soft glow of the cafe sign, they stayed there, no longer the Mafia boss and the single mother, but two people who had found peace in each other's scars.
Love. Light.
And finally home. The night was soft with rain again, the same kind that had fallen a year ago when everything began. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement, and Il Voluto glowed like a promise at the end of the street. Inside, the restaurant was exactly as it had been that first night. Candlelit tables, crystal glasses gleaming, the faint hum of jazz beneath the sound of rain. The only difference was in the air itself. The tension that once followed James Kaplan wherever he went had been replaced by something warmer.
Peace.
James sat at his usual corner table, the one that faced every exit, out of habit rather than paranoia. His black suit was tailored and crisp, but tonight, a white rose was pinned neatly to his lapel, Helen's favorite flower. He wasn't waiting for an enemy. He was waiting for a family. The waiter, nervous but smiling, approached him quietly. Everything's ready, Mr. Kaplan. James nodded. Thank you. The waiter hesitated. You, sure about doing it here, sir? James's mouth curved faintly. This is where I met them. Feels right to start again here. The doors opened just then, letting in a gust of cool air and 4 bursts of color. The restaurant hushed. Ava, Luna, Mila, and Zara, identical in their little dresses of pale pink and satin shoes, marched inside with the confidence of royalty. Each carried a tiny bouquet tied with red ribbon. The sight of them broke into James like sunlight through cloud. They spotted him immediately. Uncle James. He stood as they ran toward him, their voices overlapping in laughter and excitement. Diners turned, charmed by the sight of the suited man kneeling as 4 little girls threw their arms around his neck. Whoa, he laughed, steadying himself as they clung to him. What's all this? You're trying to knock me over before dinner? We had to make sure you didn't run away, Zara declared. Yeah, Ava added, grinning. Mommy said you like to be early. He chuckled. She's right. But tonight, I'd have waited forever. The girls giggled, and James reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. But instead of opening it, he held it in his hand and looked at them seriously.
Ava, Luna, Mila, Zara.
The tone made them straighten a little, sensing something important. I need your help with something, he said softly. Something very important. What is it? Luna asked, eyes wide. I want to ask your mommy a question. But I can only do it if all 4 of you say it's okay. Ava crossed her arms, pretending to think it over. Depends on the question. He smiled. It's a good one, I promise. Zara tilted her head, mischief in her grin. Only if you promise to play Tea Party forever. James laughed, a deep, genuine sound that carried across the restaurant. Forever deal. The girls squealed and clapped their hands. Then yes, you can ask her. The doors opened again and everything stopped. Helen stood there, framed by the warm light, her hair loose around her shoulders, her dress simple but breathtaking. The candlelight turned her into something ethereal. When she saw James kneeling with the girls surrounding him, her breath caught. James, she whispered. He rose slowly, smoothing his suit, the white rose trembling slightly with his movement. You're on time, he teased softly, voice thick with emotion. Helen blinked back tears as she approached. What is all this? He smiled faintly. A repeat performance. Only this time, I'm the one doing the surprising. The girls ran to her, tugging her hands. Mommy, come on. Uncle James wants to ask you something. Helen looked from them to James, her lips trembling. You didn't. He took a slow breath, eyes locked on hers. I did. Then, in full view of everyone, the diners, the staff, the world that had once feared his name, James Kaplan dropped to one knee. The restaurant fell silent again. The only sound was the soft flicker of the candles and the steady rain beyond the windows. He opened the velvet box, revealing a simple ring, a single diamond set in gold.
No excess, no grandeur.
Just meaning. Helen Deadman, he said, voice low but steady. You and your girls walked into my life when I least deserved it. You didn't see the monster everyone else saw. You saw the man buried underneath him. You taught me what peace feels like, what love means, and what family really is. Helen's eyes shimmered as she covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. James continued, the words rough around the edges but true to the core. I used to think redemption was about undoing the past, but you showed me it's about building something better for the future. And every moment since the night you walked into that restaurant has been proof that I'm capable of it, because of you. He looked up at her, eyes soft but unyielding. So, Helen Deadman, will you marry me? Helen's breath came out in a broken laugh that sounded like a sob. She looked down at her daughters, all 4 of them watching her with wide, expectant eyes. Ava whispered, Say yes, Mommy. Please say yes, Mila added, clutching her sister's hand. Helen let out a shaky laugh, tears streaking down her cheeks. Yes, she said, voice trembling but sure. Yes, James. Of course, yes. The restaurant erupted into applause. Diners stood, waiters clapped, the girls shrieked with joy. "Mommy's getting married," they cried, bouncing up and down. James slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that had once known nothing but violence. It fit perfectly. Helen knelt to meet him halfway, and he kissed her, gentle, reverent, as though afraid she might vanish. When they pulled apart, the girls swarmed them, wrapping them both in tiny arms, a tangle of laughter and love. James held them close, eyes closed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in his life, everything he'd lost, everything he'd broken, felt whole again. Later, when the restaurant began to settle and the candles burned lower, Helen and James sat together at the same table where they'd first met. The girls had claimed a booth nearby, happily demolishing slices of cake. Helen turned her ring in the light, still a little dazed. "I can't believe you did this here," she said softly. He looked around the room, the corners of his mouth lifting. "I wanted it to come full circle. The place where my life started to change." "And where mine did," she murmured. They sat in quiet for a moment, the kind that didn't need filling. Finally, Helen spoke again, voice low. "Do you ever think about who you were before all this?" James nodded. "Every day. But I don't hate that man anymore." "Why not?" "Because without him, I never would have found you." She smiled, tears threatening again. "You always know what to say." He shook his head. "Only with you." The girls soon came running back, frosting smeared across their cheeks. Ava climbed onto James's lap while Zara tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle James," Luna said, serious, "now that you're going to marry Mommy, what do we call you?" James grinned. "Whatever you want." The four of them exchanged glances, whispering conspiratorially before turning back in unison. "Daddy James." He froze, then smiled, eyes shining with something he couldn't put into words. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I can live with that." Helen's hand found his under the table, their fingers intertwining. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, and the candles flickered low. For the first time in years, James Kaplan didn't feel like a man escaping his past. He felt like a man who had finally earned his future. As they left Il Volito that night, hand in hand, laughter spilling into the wet streets, the girls danced ahead, their reflections shimmering in puddles. Helen leaned against him, her voice quiet. "You did it, James. You really found peace." He smiled, watching the four little figures twirl under the rain. "No," he said softly. "We did." And as they disappeared into the glow of the city, James Kaplan, once the man the world feared, was, at last, exactly what he was meant to be. A husband, a father, and finally free.